Good morning and welcome to Human Resources, Legal Issues, and the COVID-19 Era. This morning's session is brought to you by our Diamond sponsor, A+ Technology and Security. We hope you'll stop by their booth in the virtual exhibit hall and thank them for their support. Our speaker today is Jay Girvin of Girvin and Ferlazzo, PC. Jay concentrates his practice in the areas of education law, private and public sector labor and employment law, and litigation. He is experienced in collective bargaining, mediation, fact-finding, arbitration, improper practice and unfair labor practice proceedings, and other labor-related matters. He also has extensive experience in employee and student discipline proceedings, unemployment and workers' compensation hearings, administrative hearings, and state and federal court proceedings. Mr. Girvin is a frequent speaker on labor and employment matters and regularly addresses the New York State Association of Towns, the New York State Personnel Association, and Association of School Business Officials, and the Northern Westchester Putnam BOCES. Now, Jay, I'll turn it over to you.
Good morning, folks, and thank you for having me. Thank you for the introduction. And we'll have an hour here to go through some of the issues that you're faced with as the directors of your facilities in the different districts throughout the state. So let's go to the first slide. You know, the takeaways today, folks, are the following. You know, we have a lot of information that I provided you in the PowerPoints, and it's probably going to be more information than we'll get through in the next hour. But the takeaways are this: you know, in your positions as the director of facilities for your school districts around the state, you want to set the standard. You want to set the standard of what your expectations are in dealing with the world in which we now live. No one could have ever anticipated or predicted what the results of COVID-19 is. You folks are there every day doing lots and lots of work, trying to deal with the issues that come to you and make sure we have the safety of everyone involved as a top priority. So you want to set the standards and you want to then lead by example. You know, you want to make sure that, you know, when you're in common areas, when you're working with others, that you have face masks and protective equipment on to the extent you should have that on. You want to make sure that safety comes first, right? You want to do regular checks of your employees to ensure that they're following the mask requirements, the PPE requirements, the social distancing requirements. And you want to make sure that they're also, performing the cleaning and social distancing issues and disinfectant issues. So some of the health and safety issues we're going to talk about today are what you just see on the first slide here. Let's go to the next slide. So these issues that you see that were on that first slide, by the way, just so you know, they've been addressed in the Department of Health guidelines, the CDC guidelines, the New York State Education guidelines, and the executive orders issued by the governor's office as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. So these are matters which are mandatory requirements and things that you have to deal with on a week in, week out basis, okay? Social distancing, you know, you'll see social distancing also called physical distancing. You want to make sure that there is social distancing. Social distancing means ensure that there's a distance of 12 feet in all directions is maintained in certain required activities such as playing a wind instrument, aerobic activity, etc. Otherwise, as you all know, the social distancing is 6 foot. You need to be 6 feet between yourself and others. You need to set up the classrooms with space from student to student where they sit of 6 feet. If for some reason you can't set up the classrooms and workstations with at least a 6 foot social distancing, the regulations and guidelines do allow for barriers in place of the 6 foot. So I do have it's not the majority, a minority of places where because of student population and otherwise, they can't maintain a 6 foot social distancing in some classes, not all, but a select few classes. They have the plastic barriers now on the desk, on the tables and things of that nature, which is allowed. It's not preferred, but it is allowed, okay? So what you want to do is make sure that in your role, as a supervisor that you want to manage by walking around. You want to make sure that the staff are uh, abiding by social distancing and wearing masks. You know, you'll have policies in each of your schools which talk about, you know, when you're in a group, you have to social distancing, you have to wear a mask. When you're in common areas of the building, you have to social distance and wear a mask. And this is particularly true of the facilities maintenance staff workers, especially during the school day when students are in the building. You don't want your folks working for you to say, well, there's nobody in the hallway right now, so I took my mask off, because that's a common area. You know, students are and can be in that hallway at some point during the day, whether in class change times, and I know there's different schedules out there now, but certainly students sometimes have to leave a classroom to go to the laboratory, to go to the principal's office and otherwise. And you want to make sure that your staff are maintaining the protocol of wearing masks throughout the day. Let's go to the next slide. Can districts require employees to social distance? Yes, the answer is yes. It's pursuant to the guidance set forth in the executive orders, and the federal guidance through State Education Department, Department of Health, and CDC. This is not an option for the employees. Social distancing is something you can and should require and enforce. Okay, you know, the failure to follow social distancing could result in the district being subjected to a fine, a penalty, or lawsuits. Listen, folks, litigation is going to come. You know, we represent school districts and employees that are on the receiving end of civil litigation, lawsuits, and things of that nature on a regular basis. And with the COVID-19 pandemic and what's happening across the country and in the state, there are going to be cases that are going to be brought. And so what we want to make sure is that if the virus finds its way inside the school buildings, the school bus on school grounds, is the district legally responsible for what ensues if somebody tests positive? You know, there's going to be issues there, how you show it came from your exposure during the schools, but any action would mean any civil action, any lawsuit from a parent of a student, from a visitor, etc., to the building, any action is going to mean a very close examination of whether the district did everything to meet their health and safety obligations. And what are some of those health and safety obligations? Right, what you have in the bullet points here. You know, the employees can be required to perform social distancing while in the buildings, can be and should be. Right? Failure to follow social distancing puts the district and you as the supervisor in bad positions. So you want to make sure that they set the example and they correct. If an employee, one of your employees sees a student walking in a common area without a face mask on, they should tell the student, hey, you need to put a mask on. If an employee sees a coworker walking in common areas, not maintaining social distancing, not wearing a mask, hey, you need to put a mask on, you need to separate. You know, lots of times now you'll see folks that have a mask on, but they pull it down so their nose is exposed. That's not the proper wearing of the mask. That should also be addressed. Folks, you got to wear the mask in a proper manner. All right, so that's part of what you can require employees to do with respect to social distancing and face coverings. Let's go to the next slide. Face coverings and PPE. Okay, any individual who's over the age of 2 and is able to medically tolerate face coverings has to wear it, and it has to cover the nose and mouth. They have to do it when they're in common areas, when there's no social distancing, etc. If you have, and the building principals and administrators are dealing with students that will come in and say they can't wear a mask, it's one thing to say you're uncomfortable. That's not enough. If you can't wear a mask, then the district can say to the staff member, the parents of the students, etc., then you need to have medical documentation that you cannot wear a mask. And then if they can't wear a mask, then you've got to address making sure there's good social distancing. You know, so what would happen, for example, if a student can't wear a mask in a particular class or throughout the day, you might put that student in the front of the class as opposed to in the back, because then the student's not breathing on other folks and things of that nature. But face coverings and PPE are very important issues that need to be addressed. And as the supervisors for your staff members, you always got to check and connect and always look and make sure people are complying. Okay? Let's go to the next one. You know, part of, and again, there's a lot of information on these slides, so I put this together in great detail based on the guidance set forth in the executive orders and in the state education and Department of Health guidelines. So you'll have these as bullet point issues that you can review on a regular basis and make sure that your staff is in compliance with everything and you're helping to structure the atmosphere and the culture in the building, okay? So you want to, by the way, with respect to some of these issues, coordinate with the local Department of Health if you have concerns with respect to what's going on in your particular workplace. You know, if cloth-based face coverings or disposable masks shall not be considered acceptable face coverings for the workplace activities that require a higher degree of protection for PPE due to the nature of the work. For those types of activities, you might have to have more than the cloth-based face covering. You might have to have the N95 respirators and the other PPE. And again, I think as supervisors, you want to make sure you coordinate that with your local health department, assuming they will help guide you on that, because it goes to the benefit of the district and to you to say, listen, I'm making sure we are complying with the regulations and the guidelines. In fact, I've reached out to our local Department of Health to make sure that in this particular position here, where there's a higher degree of protection needed because of the job at issue, the mask that we provided and the PPE equipment that we provided was appropriate. So I think you want to always coordinate that through your administrators and through the local health department. It just gives you a report card if and when there's any civil litigation and challenge here. So shows that you were in compliance, and in fact, you were continuing to check in and make sure that what you were doing was appropriate to address the safety issues of the staff, the community, the students, visitors, etc. Okay, let's go to the next. So we have, here's the legal question. Can districts require that employees wear face coverings and or PPE when performing their job duties? The answer is yes. The answer is simply yes, that you can and you should, all right, to ensure the safety of everyone's safety first. So pursuant to the orders, yes, you can and you should. Failure to follow that could result in the district being subjected to a fine, a penalty, etc. We've already talked about that. But here's the issue. This when you look at the litigation issues here, litigation's coming, right? If it finds its way into the school buildings, the buses, etc., the question is going to be who's responsible. And the standard of care is what the courts are going to look at. What standard of care was used by the district in response to the COVID pandemic? Okay, so the steps that the districts are reasonably expected to take to ensure the health and the safety of students, staff, and other people who enter the building is the standard of care issue that the courts are going to look at when this litigation starts. Okay, so if the standard of care is not met, it could give rise to negligence claims. So in the situation here, of course, you want to make sure that employees are required to wear face coverings and PPE equipment when it is necessary for the performance of their jobs. You want to make sure that the best defense is a good offense, right? So you want to be able to say that we enforce the safety rules regarding masks, regarding social distancing, regarding the use of gloves and the wearing of gloves when needed for particular tasks, regarding the assignments and how we separate desks, how we separate lunchroom tables and things of that nature. You want to make sure that the best defense is a good offense. Document the process of how the district follows the Department of Health, state education guidelines, executive orders, and things of that nature. This is in your role as a supervisor. You do that in coordination with your building administrators and the superintendent. Okay, so a lot of this is, okay, here's what we're going to do. You can require these and should require these. It's in your personal best interest to make sure that everything you're doing is dealing with the concern about safety issues regularly and often. Okay, you want to do that, and there's no pushback from the employees. If the employees say, listen, this thing's blown out of proportion, we got to get back to normalcy here. I shouldn't have to do this. This is crazy. I don't mind if you want to wear the mask, but I'm not going to wear it. That's a no. You've got to interject and intervene and say, there's no option here. You do not have the right to decide, absent a medical reason, you do not have a right to decide that you will not wear a mask, that you won't comply with social distancing. You want to enforce that and underscore that. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Spacing, configuration, facilities planning. Again, this language, these bullet points come right from the guidelines, okay? You may need to modify and reconfigure certain spaces. They talk about you don't want lockers shared. You don't want cubbies shared. You want to make sure that the exposure is limited. So there should not be any shared use of those kinds of facilities or those kinds of accesses for students or staff. You may have to change. They talk about turning desk, including teachers' desks, to make sure that they're not face to face, but rather they're facing in the same direction. So, there was lots of schools and classrooms and meeting spaces where they would have the tables in the round. They'd have the semicircles or the round circles. Now to deal with safety issues, U.S. spacing configuration facilities planning managers, you can look at doing that. And if you look at the regulations and the guidance, they give you these bullet points here, but they also talk about, making sure that people are safe and looking at reconfiguration of desks and things of that nature. They do talk about increasing the measures taken in the district for limiting bi-directional foot traffic. Bi-directional foot traffic is people walking in both ways, east and west in the same corridor. And now, to the extent your facilities allow that, you can have one ways. You see this now if you go out to the supermarkets and other places. You can have one ways in the facilities. In the very least, you want to have a tape down the middle of the hallways so that and with arrows showing what direction you're going, so that students aren't mixing and matching, walking into each other. One will be on the right-hand side, one will be on the left-hand side. I'm a former Army lawyer, and way back in the day, the military buildings always had a tape or some measure down the middle of a hallway, and you would always walk on the right-hand side of the direction you were going. It was always so you wouldn't bump into somebody. So if you can't have one ways in your hallways, you certainly want to make sure that the students are social distancing between themselves when they're walking the hallways, when it's a group as opposed to one or two students out there, and they walk on the same side so that they're not bumping into and meeting others like this. They want to walk this way, so there's some social distance between them on the hallways too. Okay, let's go to the next, which talks about facilities planning, I think, yes, okay. Facilities planning, and again, districts may choose to ease social distancing by changing the way they space in their existing buildings or by acquiring additional space. Districts are permitted, by the way, to lease structures on district sites. The commissioner has approved short-term leases to the extent districts are looking for additional space so that they can spread the students out and maintain social distancing at a high level. The commissioner has approved short-term leases. Short-term, the commissioner said up to 1 year. By the way, leasing structures on district property are not eligible for school building aid, but it is something that some districts throughout the state are looking at as an option and have done already with the opening of schools to address social distancing and space issues. You know, according to all the guidelines, you can modify and reconfigure spaces and areas within the buildings and should be doing that to enable improved social distancing. And it talks about that in the bullet points that I've given you here. Let's go to the next slide. It's continuation of facilities planning, and you can see all temporary facilities must be approved through the Office of Planning. Uh, Again, with respect to the second bullet point for toilet sinks, must maintain at least the minimum number of toilet fixtures used in the building as established in the building code, and the building code is by your local building code. That's not a state code, so make sure you comply with that. Get out and have to confirm with the local authorities on that. Where it's feasible, you can put in place measures to reduce the, again, bi-directional foot traffic using tape or signs with arrows and post signage and distance markers. You know, I think that makes a lot of sense. You know, people see that in, like I say, commercial buildings and other places, so they're used to that. I think that's good to have in your backpack, so to speak, if and when you're ever on the receiving end of a civil lawsuit. You can say, listen, we've done everything we can to address these issues. Here's some of the things we've done. And again, for bi-directional foot traffic, look at what we've done with respect to posting signs, posting arrows, social distancing, and things of that nature. Okay, drinking waters, you know, there are rules which talk about there's a code requirement for how many per occupants in the building you have to have. The drinking fountains are issues that are being looked at a regular basis. Many districts are converting a drinking fountain with where you can just lean over and take a sip to a drinking fountain, which allows people to fill up a bottle or a glass. And alternatively, many districts are, instead of having the drinking fountains, supplying students with bottled water or water in disposable cups at specified locations. So again, I think that goes a long way to show what you've done to address safety issues. And if you haven't done that, you should think about that in your individual school district. Let's go to the next slide. More information about facilities planning and safety drills. Pursuant to the Education Law 807, there's a requirement that schools conduct 8 evacuation and 4 lockdown drills each school year. You know, this has been a requirement for many school years now because of some of the national tragedies and things of that nature that you all have seen and know about. So you still need to conduct safety drills, okay? Some of the modifications that you can do pursuant to the new guidelines is you can conduct safety drills in a staggered schedule where classrooms evacuate separately rather than all at once. All right, certainly that deals with social distancing and safety issues. If you have a safety drill and the alarms go off and the whole building leaves, you know, you're going to have a lot of traffic in the hallways and things of that nature. And especially with safety drills, students get amped up and the ability to maintain social distancing is reduced. So some of the guidelines are now saying you can modify how you're complying with the need to do the 8 safety drills, and you can do that by having it staggered schedules where classrooms vacate and evacuate separately as opposed to all at once. Okay. You can similarly conduct lockdown drills in the classroom as opposed to going to the auditorium, going to the cafeteria, other gymnasium and things of that nature. You can satisfy the meeting of the 4 lockdown drills by having the lockdown in the classroom itself, and again, as a means of maintaining social distancing. So that's something that you should look at. You know, I think with respect to some of the facilities planning we're going to get to in other places, again, you should be looking also at student drop off and pickup with maybe designated areas. You want deliveries to the building in designated areas. You can look at faculty and staff entrance and exits at designated areas which are separate from where students have entrance and exits. You know, all of those kinds of issues with respect to student drop off and pickup, with respect to deliveries and staff entry and exits. They also obviously uh, help deal with bi-directional flow of folks in the hallways. So that's another way of addressing some of the safety issues in your perspectives as a facilities manager. Because when that happens, you coordinate that with your administrators. You then want the proper signage in the buildings to make sure, from your perspective as the facilities managers, that that's addressed. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Can districts require employees to create sufficient spacing in the classrooms and the areas of the building? The answer to that is yes. You know, you can't have workers saying we're not going to do that. You know, if you have instructional staff that are pushing back on the people working for you in the buildings, take it to your building principal. Again, safety first. And I don't see this happening because everyone knows this is part and parcel of the new normal in which we're in. But if and when that happens, certainly you address that with your building administrator. The key work for facilities maintenance staff is to set up the classrooms with social distancing, and you want to make sure the arrows and the lines are on the floor with respect to the directions students can walk and to maintain social distancing. So, you know, you want to make sure that you can. Districts can require employees to create the sufficient space in the classrooms and in the area of the buildings. This is part and parcel and fundamental to what you do in the districts. You want to make sure that that is happening. And you also want to monitor the arrangements of the classroom and the cafeteria to make sure that people are in compliance with the guidance and with the decisions you've made. You also want to, again, manage by walking around, because you don't want the student, staff, or otherwise pulling up the signs that you put on the floors or signs you put on the bulletin board, or, you know, erasing things or making jokes on the face of these things. You know, you want to make sure that what you've done to address safety issues is clear and it's something that is being followed. Okay, next slide, please. Um, before I got to that one, I'm sorry. The other thing on the district requiring employees to create sufficient spacing in classrooms, social distancing is 6 feet or more, or by barriers, but you can put in place plans to limit sharing of objects, as I said, such as lockers, cubbies, chalk and dry erasers, tools, and you should have that also with respect to the people working for you. To the extent they're using the same tools, the tools from different shift to shift, you want to make sure that the tools are cleaned before they're sent to the next person taking up the next shift. So, all right, so let's then go to, I'm sorry, the hygiene and cleaning and disinfection. Okay, there's lots of stuff in the guidelines with respect to hygiene, cleaning, and disinfection. They talk about high high touch surface areas should be cleaned and disinfected frequently throughout the day. They talk about cleaning and disinfection as the primary responsibilities of the school's custodial staff. Students should not be present when disinfections are in use. I do have a recent letter from the Department of Office of Facility Planning for New York State Education Department. The question was posed, could students be used to clean desks and things of that nature? Okay, and in response to that, the person in charge of the New York State Education Department's facilities branch has said the school district must decide what is appropriate as to whether a staff member or students disinfect student desks or any other areas. Okay, so students can be used, you can use students to disinfect and clean their desk and any other areas, but ultimately you have to make sure that this is the primary responsibility of the custodial staff and they're still getting in there to double up and check and make sure things are done. And you also have to then train the students on how to do that. So other examples of here's they give you I'm sorry, the high touch surface areas should be cleaned regularly. There's examples of high touch surface areas by the guidelines. You see them tables, doorknobs, etc. Other examples that I didn't put in that list would also include, chairs, obviously, that are being used by more than one person, push plates, handles on equipment, buttons on vending machines to the extent the district still has vending machines that are being used, bus seats, and handrails. So those are all high touch areas that need to be cleaned and disinfected frequently throughout the day, not simply at the end of each day. Okay. The district can choose to provide appropriate cleaning and disinfection supplies to the faculty and staff for shared and frequently touched surfaces. And again, the staff can show the students how to properly do the cleaning. I think you want to have written protocols in your position as a supervisors to clean and disinfect schools following the guidelines from the Department of Health. I'm sorry, I don't have COVID, I'm just coughing. Department of Health and CDC guidelines. So I think you need to be looking at, sorry, I gotta get a water. Excuse me one sec. All right, sorry. I just had one of my assistants grab me a cup of water. So I think you want to have written protocol concerning the cleaning and disinfecting. Can we go to the next slide? Okay, we also have hygiene, cleaning, and disinfection. It keeps going on about what the guidelines, what the executive orders are requiring. The district's plan, when you look at all these bullet points, and again, that's why I gave them details so you can have good takeaways. You should have protocols and procedures for school-wide cleaning and disinfection of classrooms, restrooms, cafeterias, libraries, playgrounds, school buses, and all other school facilities. You should have plans and written protocols on that. If you're looking at the district must provide, maintain hand hygiene stations around the school as follows. I give you those bullet points. Again, you have to train all students and staff about proper hand and respiratory hygiene. You want to document the training. Here's how we did it. Here's what we did. Here's what we showed them. You want to make sure you have a document of that. Thank you. I've already stopped coughing, but that's good. Thanks. Thank you, folks. Sorry. You want to use paper towels and when you can. Hand dryers are not recommended at all. It's just a problem with the virus and moving germs around. You want to have written protocols and signage to instruct students and staff in the correct hand and hygiene procedures. So you should have signs in your bathroom. And right now it's clean with soap and warm water and 2 versions of happy birthday. So meaning you're doing it for at least 20 seconds minimum for cleaning. So let's go to the next slide. Playgrounds are obviously part and parcel. They need to be cleaned on a regular basis. You do not want to spray disinfectant on outdoor playgrounds. High touch areas need to be cleaned regularly and routinely, and particularly in between classes going out there. I know that there's different schools that have different processes on whether playgrounds are going to be in use or otherwise, but you need to make sure they're cleaned regularly. With respect to the health office, these are all the guidance bullets coming from SED and the health department, and you have to, after each use, you got to clear the cots, the bathroom, etc. Again, post signage in the highly visible areas such as entrances, restrooms, cafeterias, other dining areas, classrooms, administrative offices, auditoriums, janitorial staff areas. That's where you want to post the signage on what it is for hygiene, cleaning, and disinfection. Next slide. Districts have to ensure regular cleaning and disinfecting, hand hygiene, wash with soap, warm water, lathering for a minimum of 20 seconds. You know, that's part of what has to be out there. And you got to make sure that if you see a staff member just go in under cold water for 3 seconds and leave, you got to stop that. Look, you know, you got to, this is for your own personal safety and that of others. You need to make sure you use warm water, soap, and at least a 20 seconds of addressing that. You know, you're going to see that these are in the bathrooms themselves. There's issues about making sure that there's social distancing. So a lot of times, for a particular example, you'll have a men's room with the urinals there that are very close to each other. So there might be tape over, let's assume you had 4 urinals in a row, you might be tape over every other one so that instead of right next to each other, you're getting social distancing. And I know you folks have done that. But those are the kinds of things that you have to look at in quick fashion. Next slide, please. The districts must have and provide for cleaning and disinfection of exposed areas. The cleaning and disinfection of your facility is something, if someone's suspected of a confirmed case, then it talks about what you have to do in response to that. Notably, by the way, if you get a confirmed case of COVID-19, you do not have to close the full facility. You have to close off the area used by the person who's suspected of the or is confirmed to have COVID-19. Now, as things get on a higher volume of issues in school districts, you know, while there's some discretion, well, Jay was here and all he was in was this one part of the building itself in these last 2 classes. That's one thing. You're going to have to close it down, disinfect it, open the and you can't open it for another 24 hours. But you don't have to close the full building. You know, you're going to see more drastic responses as this thing continues to move in a higher positive test rate around the state. But that's some of the issues that are being addressed. I think with respect to the bullet points here, you want to maintain logs as the supervisors that include the date, the time, and the scope of cleaning and disinfection, right? Whether it's for a test case or otherwise, you want to make sure your staff is daily creating a log as to the date, the time, and the scope of the cleaning and disinfection they're doing. Because if and when these lawsuits are coming, for the standard of care, you said, listen, always with safety first. This is who we are. This is what we're trying to do in our community. This is what we do every single day. And the folks working in this department are creating this log. So here's the last, you know, since opening of school, here's the log on what we do. It's not happening once a month. It happens daily. All right. Next slide, please. Can the district require employees to exercise proper hygiene? The answer, yes, they can. And yes, they can. It's required by the guidelines, and yes, they should. Okay. So you need to make sure that you can require employees to exercise proper hygiene. For example, regular hand washing with soap before eating, after sneezing, after coughing, after blowing their nose. This is what the regs require and the guidelines suggest. After using the restroom, before handling food, after cleaning surfaces that may be contaminated, after using shared equipment. That's when the guidelines and the regs are saying you have to exercise proper hygiene, and the proper hygiene for those, for examples, would be hand cleaning. But you can and you should require the exercise of proper hygiene in line with the bullet points I've given you. Next slide, please. Can the district require employees to clean and disinfect the school building? Yes, of course they can, by SED guidelines and Department of Health guidelines. And yes, of course they should. Okay. You want to make sure, by the way, that the staff working for you have adequate supplies of masks, gloves, soap, PPE equipment when they need it for the particular task they're doing. And by the way, again, as the school facilities managers, you should monitor and log in and document that the appropriate and adequate cleaning and disinfection is being done. Right? That's so you can require it, you should require it, and you want to document it. Next slide, please. Employee screening. Okay, you'll see the district has to implement mandatory health screenings, including temperature checks. And you'll see that that applies to both staff and students. Most of it is being done before they arrive at the building by the guidance and the recommendations, particularly with students. But there's issues as to what happens if somebody shows up and has a temperature. I'm in different buildings now with the somewhat new normal with some reopening. And in most of the buildings I go into, my temperature's taken before I can go further than the entrance door. So that is happening regularly. But again, you want to make sure that the employee screenings are being done. You would also, the screenings, by the way, also apply to any contractors, vendors, or visitors coming. So if you see somebody coming with supplies and you have them properly entering into a different uh, uh, building door than others, you want to still make sure the screening's done. And there's a question test that is provided to students and staff with respect to whether they've experienced any symptoms that are connected to COVID-19, which are being used regularly. You also want to make sure that there's a daily questionnaire. That's what I'm talking about, the questionnaire that's for faculty and staff. And periodically, it's also being used for students, with respect to the questionnaire that's on your bullet points there. All right, next PowerPoint. Can the district require employees to take health and screening temperature checks? Yes, they can. Yes, they should. Okay. The district is required to issue a health screening questionnaire to every school employee prior to entering the building. We have them in our office here, by the way. We have my doors closed. If I go outside my personal office in my building, I wear in my office I wear a mask throughout our office, and there's arrows on the floor and where you can go. We have 4 hallways. We have conference rooms and things of that nature, and when and if you can be in them, what happens. So the same is being done in schools as I know. And again, I think you've all done very good jobs at making sure this is in compliance with these guideposts here. I just wanted to give you the more details so you can review those at your leisure, because we're never going to get through all the details and make any additions that you may have to in your individual district. Let's go to the next slide, which talks about transportation. Okay, transportation, the districts have the authority to install hand sanitizer dispensers on the buses, as well as to allow students and staff to have personal size quantities while aboard the bus. When it first came out, there was an opposition to that. They have now, through guidance, allowed what I just talked to you about. Students must wear masks getting on and off the bus and while seated, unless they have medical documentation saying they can't. Students must maintain social distancing on the bus unless they're from the same household, then they could sit together. Bus drivers and any staff on the bus must wear masks at all times. And by the way, again, you want to make sure they're wearing masks and covering their nose. And bus drivers who have physical contact or staff members with students on the bus should also be wearing gloves. And you got to make sure that's happening. And again, create your log on that. Next slide on transportation. The buses should be cleaned in between the AM and PM runs. You can't refuse a child to get on the bus if the parent failed to do the temperature check. But if that situation as a bus driver, your staff members need to tell the district folks once they arrive at the district so the child can be screened. With respect to drivers and social distancing on the bus, we already talked about, needs to be maintained. Drivers need to address that. Students get on the bus, they social distance, and then they sneak around and sit next to each other. Drivers need to be aware of that and correct that. And if there's a problem with student behavior, the driver should bring it to your attention and bring it to the administrator's attention. Okay, let's go to the next one. And can districts require employees to clean and disinfect the school bus? Yes, they can, and yes, they should. I'm nothing if I'm not redundant. I'm an old Army lawyer from a lifetime ago, and the military's motto for training is tell them what you're going to teach them, tell them what you taught them. So yes, you can, yes, you should. Let's go to the next slide. We have food services. So there's lots of guidance with the bullet points I've given you on food services. Look at those on your own, at your own leisure. Consider appropriate social distancing and modification to services. For example, many districts are providing meals in the classrooms. They stagger meal periods, etc. You want to have procedures that account for cleaning and disinfection prior to the next set of or group of students arriving for the meals. So you want to make sure that that's done. You want to prohibit sharing of food and beverages. For example, no buffet style meals or snacks, and the only sharing of food if it's in the same household. So when that happens, if the staff members working for you in the cafeteria see that, step in and correct it and address it. Again, if the students turn a deaf ear and a blind eye to that, bring it to the attention of the building administrator. Okay. Next one. Can districts require employees to clean and disinfect or rearrange the cafeteria? Again, the answer is going to be yes, they can, and yes, they should. Go to the next slide. So yes, so again, yes, you can require employees to clean and disinfect or rearrange the cafeteria. They can do that, and they should do that. Let's go to the next one because I know we're getting closer. The next slide, please, goes to ventilation. Okay, ventilation. You want to make sure that you maintain adequate and code required ventilation. You can work with the local department heads on that in your locality, but one of the things you're talking about is increasing ventilation by opening windows and opening doors. We have lots of school buildings where the doors in the classrooms and in the offices automatically close, and now SED guidelines and Department of Health is recommending doors be maintained in an open manner so that there's more ventilation throughout the day. It increases the airflow. So you should look at that, and your folks should be looking at that on a regular basis. Let's go to signage, which is the next thing. The signage, the district has to post signage throughout the school, and the signage should remind individuals to report systems, tell people if they feel sick, etc. These messages should be shared with the school community, and you can customize the signs for the age-appropriate students. So certainly signs at the elementary building would be different and can look different than the signs at the middle school and high school. One of the things I've gotten in other presentations is what happens when you think staff members are taking advantage of, oh, I don't feel good today, I need to quarantine, and then you see them online where they went out and they're out fishing or golfing and things of that nature. If you have a situation where, look, your staff is working above and beyond, but if somebody's taking advantage of this, you need to bring that, as a supervisor, you can deal with that. I'm dealing with that in a select few cases right now, and we're dealing with that. That listen, this is your job, this is your obligation. Safety first. You've been provided safety, and if anything, when you called in sick and said you had to quarantine, and then went on a fishing trip and posted all these crazy videos online, it shows that you're ignoring things, and you're going to be subjected to corrective action on those. So when and if that happens in your case, and I'm not suggesting it happens regularly, but when if that happens, bring that, as the supervisor, bring that to the superintendent's attention, and to work out a way to addressing that. Next slide, please. Can districts require employees to post signage related to COVID-19 and health and safety procedures? Yes, they can. Yes, they should. All right. I'm not being, again, if I'm not redundant. Next slide. There's obviously dangers of employees' failure to follow state mandated COVID health and safety procedures. If they fail to follow the procedures, it could result in a district being subjected to a fine, a penalty, potential lawsuits, and loss of state funding. So it's in your personal best interest and the school district's best interest to make sure that the health and safety procedures are being followed. You do not want this to lead to negligence and all of a sudden a spike up, and it's going to be a shutdown of the building and delay of instruction. So you want to make sure that that happens, and you can see in the community here, there are several in the capital region, several school districts that, because of COVID-19 and what's happening with remote instruction or otherwise, it has led to significant number of layoffs of both instructional and non-instructional staff. So this is something that you want to make sure that in your conversation with the folks working for you, it's in their personal best interest, safety-wise and job security-wise, to follow the state mandated health and safety procedures and do what they're supposed to with due diligence. Okay, next one. Reopening issues, very quickly. How did we get here? Next slide is how did we get here? From March through June, and now since that time, we've had on a regular basis a significant number of executive orders. We've had guidance from the Department of Health and guidance from the State Education Department. The guidance from the Department of Health is 20-odd pages long. The guidance from the State Education Department is over 150 pages long. I have reviewed, and as with my office colleagues, that in detail and have understand what the guidance requirements are, and we're dealing with that on a regular basis and working with clients throughout the state. That's how we got here. Next slide. The school reopening issues. Here's some of the issues that are out there. So we've been talking about that. Working assignments. You're going to see sometimes the unions are bringing these to the district. Job assignments, hazard pay, required cleanings, deep cleaning, spacing of classrooms, use of leave. So these are the issues that are coming up, and we have many places where sometimes saying, well, we want a new memorandum of agreement. If the issue at hand is required by state education guidelines, Department of Health guidelines, the executive orders, there's nothing that has to be done other than complying of that nature. It doesn't mean that it's not something from a human resources point of view, a labor management point of view, you wouldn't discuss with them, but those things don't have to be addressed because you're just complying with the new guidelines and requirements. Next slide, please. So school reopening, use of leave issues, what does the employee qualify for or have available to them? It depends on what the situation is. There's New York State paid sick leave, the Family Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act, Emergency Family Family and Medical Leave Expansion Act. There's contractual leave issues. Those are all issues that in your positions as the supervisors of the maintenance folks and buildings and grounds folks, if you have issues on that, just get it to your building principal and superintendent. We're dealing with superintendents across the state. We have flow charts and things of that nature that we've given out to the clients on. Here's, it's a yes or no. If it's yes, go this way, no, go here, and it keeps a flow chart on showing what kind of leaves are out there for folks. And I've attached for you in the next several slides. If you go to the next slide, yesterday in the Times Union newspaper, there was an article about the new guidance from the Department of Health on what can happen with respect to can a person go to work and can a person go to school. It started with both students and staff. So I attached to your outlines here to the PowerPoint. These are the relevant slides available through the Department of Health with respect to employee status as opposed to student status. If you went on the Times Union yesterday, there is the site in the article talking about the new guidance from the Department of Health and the flow charts. And it'll have a PowerPoint. I'm sorry, it'll have a website that you can click on, and you'll find the complete list of these. There's 3 or 4 more that deal with students as opposed to staff. But these are the things that were discussed in the Times Union article yesterday. They weren't in the paper. They didn't show these. We had these for a couple of days, and it provided them to some of our clients. So the rest of the issues here for you are just these flow charts created by the Department of Health of whether can I go to work today at school, and then just flash through them quickly. Robbie, you can show the rest of them that deal with the same questions here. I have COVID-19 systems. When can I go back to work? So you'll see the flow charts, yes or no. A COVID-19 screen is flowing for students, flow chart for students and staff. One more, I think. Keep going through them. Is that the last one? No, there's like 3 more. Yep. Exclusion protocols for contacts for symptomatic students and staff. And that's it. So I know that was fast and furious, and I know that we have a due date, completion date by 11:30, and any questions. So now, according to my timeline, we have maybe 3 minutes for questions. I apologize for running through quickly, but I wanted to give you detail in the PowerPoints for your takeaway. And if you have questions, then we can't address them today. If you email them to SFMI, they'll send them to me, and I will try and do a written reply to the participants and the attendees today if we don't have enough time to address them now.
I have one question here. How do we manage the message when we start to close the dampers to protect the units from freezing? They're not designed to bring in 100% fresh air during freezing outdoor temps.
That's just scary.
How do we manage the message to the community? Read that to me again. I'm sorry.
Sure. How do we manage the message when we start to close the dampers to protect the units from freezing?
And the message is that now we don't have the air circulation, the ventilation is not as circulated as much as if we didn't close them.
Right.
You know? Yeah. So again, I think that part of the message is that, listen, right now we can open windows, we can open the dampers and things of that nature, but fall's here and it's coming, and winter's going to be here soon. And as people should understand, we're not going to be able to keep the windows open. We're going to have to close the dampers just because of the use of the dampers and what could happen if we don't close them. And that's why it's more and more important that social distancing, face coverings be worn at all times.
Can you explain why PE classes are restricted to 12 feet during aerobic activity and athletics is not?
Yeah, I mean, in PE classes, they're saying because, you know, the breathing and sometimes even the louder voices means it's flying further. Why it doesn't happen in athletic competition, that's New York State School Athletics Association grappling with that. You know, sometimes they're going to say, well, there's more protective equipment. It seems inconsistent. I can just tell you that in the school, that's what they're saying. In the interscholastic, they're not yet limiting that. And you know, I'm a former coach and a referee, so I completely understand trying to get the new normal, but it's a different world, and it seems inconsistent. I don't have an answer for that.
How does opening of doors with closers work? Are we ignoring fire codes?
Well, again, I think you have to go to your local code enforcement folks and say, this is the recommendation to get better ventilation, and here's how we're going to do that. Is that a problem? And I think most of them are recognizing that, okay, and how we do it, if we have stoppers, can they be kicked in so the door will automatically close? But I think you want to make sure that you have them weighing in on that. I've seen them, for the most part, cooperative.
Okay, and final question here. I have an employee who is on his vacation, will be traveling to Florida. He will have to quarantine for 14 days on return. He will receive his normal pay from the federal government. So an employee chooses to travel to a restricted state and then gets 14 days of paid vacation on top of this. The question is, am I missing something?
Yeah, and what that one, Robin, I'm going to do, maybe I'll do a written reply to that, because we're dealing with that right now in 4 other districts just this week alone, where people are saying, well, I had these reservations, I want to do this, and I've got a lot of questions posed on, wait a second, you know, they know this is not appropriate, and if they're voluntarily doing this, can we address that with the employee from a corrective action kind of view? So so I will work. I'll put together something in writing. If you email me that question, I'll put together something in writing, then you can send it out to the attendees.
Okay, we are right at 11:30. Thank you so much, Jay.
All right, thank you, folks. Stay healthy and happy, and good luck getting through this school year.
Thank you, everyone. Next up is our Wine and Win celebration. We hope you'll join us there.